If you've ever had a symptom change and immediately thought, is this a relapse? But you didn't know how to figure that out or what to do next, then keep watching. In this video, I'm going to show you a simple way of how to think about symptoms so that you can respond more clearly and to stop every change feeling like something serious is happening. If you're someone diagnosed with MOGAD antibody disease, then you probably experience a lot of symptom changes, especially if you're recently recovering from an episode. And when those symptom changes happen, you're not only thinking about how it feels, you're also thinking about what those changes could mean. And if you don't have a clear way to interpret that, every change starts to feel like something serious could be happening, which can get you stuck in a loop of constant uncertainty, where you're reacting to how things feel instead of what's actually happening. And this can also become more difficult as the fear and worry of another relapse can increase your stress. That stress can make symptoms feel even worse, which just reinforces the cycle. The common reaction to symptom change is feeling like you have to do something with it. You can't just ignore it, but you're not sure what it actually means either. So what usually happens is that you end up going in one of two directions. Either you start analysing everything, overthinking it, and checking every detail, or you try and push it away completely, tell yourself it's nothing, and hope that it settles. But in both cases, you're actually still guessing. You're either reacting to the fear or completely avoiding it, and you're not actually getting any clarity. And there's actually a reason why this happens, because when you've experienced a MOGAD episode or relapse before, your brain becomes much more sensitive to anything that feels even slightly similar, especially if that symptom change is something that you've experienced during an episode. So even a small change doesn't just feel like a small change, it feels like it could be something more. And this is what makes it so difficult, because your brain's just trying to protect you, but it can't always tell the difference between something serious and something that feels similar. I've been living with MOGAD for over 6 years now, and over time I started to notice a pattern whenever my symptoms changed. And what I've realised was it's actually not about having certainty all the time, it's about having a way to handle those moments where symptoms change and you're not immediately reacting out of fear or feeling like you have to do something straight away. And instead of trying to solve things straight away, you actually need a way to slow things down before you react. And over time, and going through so many symptom changes again and again, I've found myself coming back to the same 3 steps. And this is not something complicated or clinical, it's more something that I've come up with over time living with the condition and through my own experience, where I can then use it whenever I get a symptom change and I can't trust just exactly how I'm feeling in that moment. Interpret, regulate, and respond. First, interpret what you are actually noticing, because if you don't do that, you end up reacting to how it feels rather than what's actually changed. So instead of jumping straight to conclusions, I started asking myself a few simple questions. What has actually changed here? Is it something familiar or is it something completely new? And is this happening in a place where I've had symptoms before? And finally, is there anything else that could explain the symptom changes? Things like stress, fatigue, or changes in my environment. That small shift from reacting to questioning can actually completely change how you interpret the symptoms that you're experiencing. Second, regulate your reaction, because even if you try to think clearly, that initial reaction of fear is likely to still be there. And when you've been through something like this before, your brain does get wired to look for signs that it might be happening again. So even a really small change could trigger that same sense of urgency. And in that moment, everything can suddenly feel much more serious than what it actually is, especially if it feels similar to something you've experienced during an episode or a relapse. So instead of trying to remove that reaction, just pause and let's stop for a moment and recognize what it actually is. It's a reaction, not a conclusion. Make sure you give yourself a bit of time and space before deciding what to do next. And then the third step is deciding how to respond. Because if you don't take this step consciously, you're going to react automatically. And that's likely going to be driven by fear. And what I've realized over time is that you don't always need an immediate answer to make a sensible decision. Sometimes it's just monitoring it for a few days going forward. And sometimes it is reaching out for medical advice, either urgently or non urgently. But the key difference is you're making that decision deliberately with a sense of control and instead of reacting to that initial sense of fear. For example, recently I've started noticing a pressure around my chest and rib cage. It's mainly around like the front here. And after I noticed it, my mind immediately went to, is this something serious? So it immediately felt like something I needed to pay attention to. But instead of reacting straight away, I went through the process and tried to slow things down. I looked at what had actually changed, and it was uncomfortable, but it wasn't painful, and it wasn't affecting my breathing or anything really serious like that. And when I thought about it a bit more, I actually realized that I've experienced this before, just not for a long time. I also started to notice a bit of a pattern as to when it'd show up or become a bit stronger. It was mostly happening later on in the evening when I was more tired, and although it came and went fairly regularly over a couple of weeks, it actually wasn't getting any worse. I also looked at what else has been going on. It had been a particularly stressful few weeks at work and at home and everything else I've been doing alongside that. So instead of immediately assuming the worst, I recognized that initial reaction and that sense of urgency for what it actually was. And then I decided to monitor the symptom going forward rather than escalate straight away to seeking medical advice. But I also had a clear point in mind that if it got worse, if it became painful, or started spreading, then I would go seek medical advice. But over time, it's gradually just settled and gone away by itself. And looking back, it was most likely linked to stress and fatigue. So if I'd have reacted immediately, I probably would have assumed that it'd be something much more serious than what it actually was. And this is where things start to feel different, because the goal isn't to remove uncertainty completely. It's to stop every symptom from feeling like something urgent. Because the reality of living with a condition like MOGAD is that symptoms will likely change and things will feel unclear at times. But instead of every change triggering that same sense of urgency, it becomes something that you can pause with, look at more clearly, and then respond to in a way that actually makes sense. And over time, that makes things feel a lot more manageable because instead of constantly reacting, you start to feel a bit more in control. If navigating symptom changes is something that you've been struggling with, I want you to know that it's quite common and you're definitely not alone with it. If you want more support with this, you can join my email list in the video description below. This is where I share practical ways to make sense of life with MOGAD with a bit more clarity and control. And I've also made a video reflecting on my 6 years of living with MOGAD, what the journey actually looks like over time, and some things that don't get talked about very often, and you can watch that here.